I'm not one of them. Anyone could probably tell. Stick out like a sore thumb. Speak their language. I go to their church. I've worked their land my whole life. But they say I'm a Sassenach at heart. An Englishman. Foreigner. Because my mum was born there. Because my father was glacket enough to get into trouble when he was travelling with the Henry boats. She was from Norfolk, and I've never been, of course, and she never spoke about it. But she never lost the accent. Nobody ever forgot where she was from, and they never forgave her for it. I guess in that way me and the Aaron had a lot in common, both of us strangers in a community bound together by survival and gossip. She was already pregnant with me when he brought her back. They weren't even married yet. They said she'd done it on purpose. Some of them claimed I wasn't even my father's in the first place, till I grew up to have his hair, his nose, and his height. Then he died, and it stopped mattering at all. Suddenly I wasn't even half one of them. I was just another Sassenach in the village. And they never forgave me for that. The children liked to play at being the Anran. He was a sleek at one in their eyes, with wild hair and sharp fingernails, and a voice like grinding stones. A story their mammy used to scare them into eating the last of their scones at tea time. I was almost disappointed the first time I saw him. I was out fishing, walking along the shore. It's a hard walk. The path is blocked several times by rocks twice the height of me and 4 or 5 times the width. The story goes that they were left behind by the Firmhain, the giants who made the landscape what it is. They dropped them carelessly along the water's edge and never bothered to come back them up. That's the story my father told anyway. He was perched atop of one of the rocks, the sun behind him, sitting with one knee up, resting his chin on it, like he'd been sitting there for hours. It took me a while to realise who it was. He was a perfectly ordinary looking man, grey hair, trim beard, knitted jumper. I only knew who he was because I didn't recognise him. It's not often you get that around here. He greeted me, smiling like he had a reason to. We made small talk about the weather and the fishing season, normal things neighbours talk about. He spoke like my man. He lived up there, the cave of the son of the landless man. Obviously, the Annan wasn't the son, but wherever he came from, it fits. In the village, they called me Mac and Gala. I didn't understand what it meant until I had grown almost up to my man's chin. They used to refer to me by the name at school, down to the register. Blair, Campbell, Fraser, MacDonald, Mac and Gala, MacAlethan. I did it one day in front of my mum. She went wild, really raging, greeting and shooting. Didn't stop then. Just gave the women folk more of a reason to sit along the village wall and twitter at one another like useless, overfed hens. But it was enough to make me ask what it meant. I think I'd known, really, what they were calling me. What they were calling her. Bitch. The son of the bitch. She apologised as soon as she told me. Her eyes darting over me, around me. She couldn't look at me and I couldn't look at her. We never talked about it again. The name stuck. The next time I saw the Adaran, I told him about his nickname in the village. He laughed and told me he would never be lonely if he had the birds to keep him company. I stood and listened to them sing for a while. I asked him where they came from, and he disappeared over the brow of the hill into the sea har. People had their own explanation for his appearance, as people always do. One day he was a disgraced laird from the south. Next day he'd killed a lad who'd gone too far with his wife. The explanation was never the same twice. I never did find out why he chose to settle in a cave so far from home, but I do know he wasn't the type to run from danger like that. He wouldn't have died the way he did if he was. My mam had lived my father by near enough 10 years. I was only wee when he died. I was old enough that I remember him, but young enough that I wasn't sure what was happening. Then it was just me and my mam. I was too young to be much use in the craft. Her hands were always rough and swollen. She was always so gentle with them. The Anaran died on the first day of sun after a storm. The day when you can't remember what it was like to have the world tossed around you by a gale. When the sound of thunder has stopped echoing in your ears. When everything is finally silent and still. He died in my mum's bed, which had gone empty for almost 30 years, of the same hacking cough and burning fever which took her. He caught the chill from helping a man from the village. His boat had overturned in the loch. None of us could swim. I don't know if the Anaran happened to be watching like the rest of us, or if it was just luck that he happened to be passing at that moment, but he waded in. The water must have been freezing, because it was mid-October. The villagers thanked him. They were polite, but they left him gasping for breath on the shore. They walked away in small groups, arm in arm, with the shock of the morning. They left us there. The Anaran didn't say a thing until he was settled in my mum's bed. He was still shivering, his hands shaking so hard he was spilling tea down himself. He was apologising, over and over, for spilling. Worried it would leave stains on the blankets. Worried he was being a bother. He caught a chill, and shivered no matter how high I stoked the fire. The wind picked up, howled through the rafters of the house. He coughed almost as often as he drew breath. The rain started to fall and didn't stop. He cried out names I didn't know. The storm broke. He died. I told everyone. I told the man the Anaran had saved. Still, I buried him alone, myself, early in the morning, while the day was still deciding between rain and sun. I didn't have a name to put on the grave. It's a beautiful spot, sheltered from the sun by a rowan tree. You can see the sea on one side, the house on the other. It's empty now, of course, but he shouldn't be lonely. He can hear the birds in the morning, and he has my mam on one side and my father on the other. In my place. I knew, burying the Anaran, that I couldn't stay there to live or die. I couldn't stay with those people, those hateful, ungrateful people. Walking down the road, I did look back. I looked at the house where I'd been away in, where I'd been with my mam. Seeing the house standing like that, empty and cold, it was... But I left anyway. I go to Norfolk, to my mam's home, and see where she grew up, where she met my father. She fell so in love that she would move hundreds of miles to live among people who hated her just for her birthplace. Then I'll continue south, do what work I can find, live in abandoned houses, lean-tos and caves. I'll be buried by strangers.
Nothing for me, thanks. I'm just waiting for someone. I won't be long. We just needed somewhere to meet. Somewhere we wouldn't be seen. He wouldn't want to be seen in a place like this. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that I'm just waiting for him. He'll be along soon. I knew I'd found something special when he smiled at me. We were at the docks. He was wearing this sou'wester pulled down low against the drizzle, the kind of drizzle that gets you soaked through. I wouldn't have been out in it if I'd had the choice, but we'd run out of flour and we still had loaves to bake, so I'd stopped to watch them unload the fish from the boats. The girls with their quick knives, gutting and salting, tossing the herring aside with a kind of carelessness. I can hear my mother scolding me for stopping, the way she would, well, it doesn't matter what she would say. It doesn't matter what she will say. She wasn't there. I suppose she's not here, so it doesn't matter what she would say. They were singing something mournful, full of the kind of pain that only gets passed down through families. He smiled at me, and it went from there. when the boats moved on, I thought that was it. He'd smiled at me a handful of times. We'd only spoken a few words. I knew where he was from, even if I couldn't pronounce it properly, if I couldn't find it on a map. And I knew his name, Ian. It was weeks before they came back, but he found me. Or more accurately, he found the shop, my father's shop. I still don't know if he wanted a loaf or me. It doesn't matter. He got both. He started talking about home, his island. It had never occurred to me before that somebody could be proud of their home, of where they came from. Home has always just been cramped and crowded, dirty, dark. I can't remember the last time it wasn't raining. It always smells. It's too close to the docks and, well, it doesn't matter now. Ian says that you can walk for a day without encountering a single soul where he's from. He says that the hills go on as far as the eye can see, and the sky above you is so big, it feels like it goes on forever. I could believe I've seen it, just from hearing him talk about it. He tells stories of the creatures that live there as well, giants at war with each other, and fairy cows that can't cross across consecrated ground, and seals who can take off their skin and become people. I like the seals the best, especially when he tells it. He calls them selkies. There's a story about a man who falls in love with a selkie woman, and he steals her skin so that she has to stay with him. They get married, she has his children, but when she finds her skin, she still goes back home to the sea. Ian says he tells the children a version where the mother returns year after year to see her family, but she doesn't. I could never understand why she left. She had her husband, she had children, and Ian said she loved them as much as a mother ought to. Ian understood, though. He says that's what the song they were singing that day at the docks was about, not being forced away from your home. He says there's nothing stronger than the call from home, that feeling that a piece of you is missing. Homesickness. The idea has always fascinated me, the idea of missing somewhere so much, it's like being ill. Ian says, I'll understand when I see his island. One look and you'll be caught, he says. One look and it'll be like putting on your selkie skin for the first time. I've only left the city once before. My aunt, my mother's sister, was sick. We took her to Blackpool for the air and for some water treatment the doctor had recommended. I went as her companion, although I think it was mostly to get me out from underfoot. That was the summer, that the air was so hot and heavy that no matter what you did, it felt like you couldn't breathe. It clung to you, followed you in from outside and drove you out from inside. I was restless with it. We went paddling to cool ourselves down. It was my brothers who first showed me the way down to the seashore, past the docks where you couldn't be seen. When we got caught down there, me with my skirt by my knees and them with their shirts discarded on the rocks. I was the one who got the trouble for it. Tearaway, they called me. Quite liked it. I didn't mind being sent away either. It was cooler there, and we spent most of the time outside. My aunt called it promenading, walking up and down the seaside. She said it was supposed to get the air in your lungs. It smelt like rotten seaweed. I didn't care, I liked the sea. I'd never seen so much empty space before. Never seen so far before. It felt like I could breathe for the first time in my life. Ian lives by the sea. I don't know how to do any of the things he says I'm going to need to do. I don't know how to take care of livestock, or gut a fish, or plant things in fields. Crofts. He calls them crofts. I have to remember that. Anyway, I'll learn. I'll pick it up. I already know how to bake a loaf. I can keep a house. And I won't be alone. Ian says he has friends with wives who will show me what to do. That's what they're like over there. They help each other. Not like here, where you can pass your neighbour in the street without ever knowing it. Not like here, where no one will even notice I'm gone. Father, of course. My mother. My brothers. I've got 3 of those. 2 sisters. I was the first. I'm the oldest, but not the oldest. Too prone to flights of fancy, my mother says. Not responsible enough to take care of the shop on my own, like the sisters, like my sisters. Not male enough to go out to work, like my brothers. Not that I'd want to be a boy, I just think it would be nice to have that many options. To be able to get an apprenticeship and learn how to make stuff with my hands. To be able to follow my abundance of fancy wherever it took me. Like Ian, he follows the herring on the boats, up and down the coast, east and west, seeing all kinds of people. He's met every kind of folk you can ever imagine. He gets to breathe in the sea, the wind. I suppose, if he lives right on the sea, he can do that at home as well. Honestly, you have to wonder why he ever leaves. They've got everything they need there. Land and livestock, stories. I could travel around the whole country just listening to his stories. He took me to his island, right from my father's shop. He told me of the people and the way they come together. They have these parties just in someone's living room, and he calls them Kayleys, which he says is very similar to the word for together. I like that. A party just for being together. They eat, and they play music, and they dance. He says he'll teach me. Their names trip off the tongue like nothing I've ever heard before. the Highland Scottish, the Circassian Circle, and the Orcadian Strip the Willow. He says there's drinking as well. But a man has to blow off steam sometimes, doesn't he? It's better he does it there, where I can keep an eye on him. But Ian isn't one for this kind of place. I don't need to worry about it. In fact, he wouldn't want to be seen here. Maybe that's why he's running late. He didn't want to come in. He'll be waiting for me outside.
It's a relief, really. No, I know how that sounds. I know what that makes me sound like. But it really is a relief. You'd understand if you were there. It's just constant. There's Mum and then there's my wife, and between the two of them I don't get a moment of peace. They're like two spoiled hens just pecking away. Two territorial hens. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the boy. My boy. Wee Alistair. He's hardly up to my knee yet, but they fight over him like he's the future king. Maybe if he was, just keep the two of them apart. Could live in separate wings of the castle. They'd never have to see each other. You know, Alistair would never stand for that. He loves his man. He loves his Shamir. I doubt the two could ever deny him anything, much less themselves. But I could live in peace. Ride off into battle when they start getting on the nerves. It wasn't so bad at first. My mum didn't like Eleanor. Not from the moment I introduced them. Not from the moment she knew what I'd done. But they made do. We muddled along, especially once Alistair arrived, and they had a wee one to dote over. There were a few golden days when it felt as though it was working out. Changed when my father died. Mam moved in with us, into the spare room. Alistair crammed in at the foot of a bed. I didn't see so much as an acre of their land, of course. That went to my brother, and my mam came to us. I don't grudge it. I don't really. He has 4 wee ones underfoot, and another on the way now besides. They don't have the space for our mam. It does make things difficult. I'll take another pint, yeah, please. The wife would smother me if she found me. I'd just tell her the catch was a little leaner than usual. She's none the wiser. We scrape by. I've earned this. I work hard. I wasn't much more than a boy myself when I met her. Don't regret it, no. So much as it didn't turn out as I hoped. It didn't turn out how either of us hoped. We had this idea that it would be easy. Eleanor was disappointed the moment she laid eyes on my wee house. You could see it in her face. It's better than half the houses in the glen. Still better than the wee bottom that I grew up in. I slept at the foot of my mam's bed for long enough. We had the space to give wee Alistair a whole room of his own. Well, before my mam moved in. Eleanor asked about the parlour. Asked about where we were supposed to host guests. I didn't know how to answer that one, standing in the middle of the living room with the chimney blowing smoke down on the carpet. It's not exactly one of the big city places, with all different stories and a dozen rooms besides, but it does the job. It's warm and it keeps the rain off your head. She got used to it soon enough, but she never really settled. She never really made her peace with it. Went about the whole thing wrong, really. I was engaged at the time, you know, a wee local lass. She was sweet as anything, stood to inherit half the glens but her Shamir. That's why I went away on the boats, trying to save up some money to see the two of us through until we had some land of our own. I didn't write to warn her about Eleanor. I didn't warn anyone. She kicked up a hell of a fuss, enough to wake the devil himself on Saturday morning. Of course, that sent Eleanor off. They went back and forth for a while, the two of them. It was my mother who put a stop to it. I don't think I've ever been glad to see the woman. The wee lass married someone else, eventually. They have a dozen wee ones now, a glen full of sheep crops. I don't think she and Eleanor ever made amends. Then again, I don't think Eleanor ever made much progress with the other lasses back home. She's a bit of a homebird like that. Doesn't really mix with the others. Which is fine. It is fine. I just wish she would make a bit more of an effort. She's come across as stuck up, like she's better than the other lasses. I love her. I really do. I just think it's going to be difficult, and we allow Alistair when he starts school. All of the other children are in and out of each other's houses at all hours. Then again, I don't know how he will get on with that anyway. He's a mama's boy, that's for sure. Always greeting for her, always clinging at her skirt. She's going to spoil him, but she won't take it from a man, and I don't even suggest it. That's another thing that would be different if I were king. She's got a sharp tongue in her, no doubt. It was one of the reasons she caught my eye. The way she spoke to one of the lads in the docks got a bit too close, and she knew he was trying it on. It used to make me laugh. Now everything is an argument. And then again, if I were king, I would never have travelled with the boats. I wouldn't need the scallon to line my coffers. I could carry a sword instead of pulling the nets. We Alistair wouldn't make much of a king anyway. Everybody knows the story of Bannockburn. Our Robert the Bruce returning home victorious, the Sassenach Edward sent back where he came from. Not many know what happened next. David came next. David, his only son who had no sons. Then the second Robert, he didn't have much of the shunner in him, that's for sure. The third Robert asked to be buried in his own midden for his failures. The first James murdered by his own people, and the second blown up by his own gun. The third killed at the Battle of Sochiburn. The fourth James married the Sassenach princess. He set into motion the union of the crowns, the union of the countries, bought and sold for English gold. At least I can't be accused of that. Eleanor was as penniless then as we are now. She'd scold me for saying that. She would point out the shoes on my feet and the clothes on wee Alistair's back, food on the table, a pint in my hand, and then she'd scold me for that too. But it's been a close thing sometimes. We've had more than our fair share of lean winters, no matter how hard I work. I've earned a drink. Maybe a wee dram. Nushka Beha. I'll call it a night. They named that right, didn't they? Water of life. They've been drinking stuff since before records began. Coming alive on it. No wonder there was such a skirmish over the taxes on the stuff. They used to smuggle it, into the thirsty port towns. They were ingenious. Dozens of ways to get it past the Sassenach guards. Under the frocks of pretty young women, and the knapsacks of men dressed up as soldiers, fake funerals, a whole procession of people for a coffin filled with whiskey. I think a Robert would approve. A funeral for the water of life. Yes, just a dram and then I'll go. My wife will kill me if I go home without any wages to show for myself. It'd be like another Bannockburn, but this time we certainly won't be returning home victorious.